Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome to Daf Yomi Week in Review. It is a pleasure to see you all on this last meeting of ours in May and the last one before Shavuot. So I hope everyone's excited to receive the Torah later this weekend after Shabbos. I'm Rachel Scheinerman. I edit My Jewish Learning, a daily dose of Talmud. And this is where we get to meet online and learn a little bit in person of what we experienced in the daf this week. A little bit of chazara, a little bit of review. And this morning, or at least morning by me, we are joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. So Rabbi Goldberg, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
All right. Good morning. Also morning by me. And I'm usually on the East Coast because I live in New Jersey, but I'm in Chicago today. So I'm feeling the extra in awe of the people who are west of the East Coast timeline who come to Daf Yomi as it's an hour earlier here. And I know we have people further west than me. So not that, I love everyone's commitment to show up to this space, even if it's the afternoon for you. But as someone who's not always a morning person, appreciating the further west and the earlier it is. Thanks for being here, everybody. Today, we're going to focus on some categories of oaths that the Talmud talks about. But embedded in the discussion from this past week and a little into, I think it's tomorrow, there's a concept that the Mishnah and the Gemara brings up a couple times that enters into the conversation because we're talking about oaths. But it's really a broader concept about how the rabbis think about our relationship to Jewish practice. So we're going to start with oaths. We're going to consider this principle that got introduced this week, although we've seen it on other Masechtot in the past as well, although more sporadic. We had a few mentions of it. And then we'll think a little bit about what the contemporary mindset is and how in a contemporary mindset we might think about what the rabbi says. So some of that's a little cryptic. It'll become clearer as we go. I am placing right now in the text a link to the slides I'm going to share in a moment. Feel free to look now or later. I'm going to share those on the screen right now. I hope I picked the right window. Give me just a second. Sorry. Yes. Yes. I'm on the Google page, not the slideshow. Here we go.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Yes. I didn't see it immediately on my screen. Here we go. All right. So first, just a reminder to everybody about the style of the Mishnah and its brevity. The Mishnah we're going to start with, which we saw on page 25, this is more a word-for-word translation of what's in the original language. Both matters that concern oneself and matters that concern others, both tangible matters and intangible matters. Now, in and of itself, that's not sufficient because it's like a partial thought, right? It seems to be a Mishnah that builds on the Mishnah from before. To fully understand what this means, there's a lot missing. So I also brought the Steinsaltz explained version, but I wanted everyone to notice, when we're looking at the text with the fuller explanation, just notice how many extra words we need to add to make sense of the words of the Mishnah itself. I need to remind myself of that as I get used to reading through the Steinsaltz piece to remember, which part's the explanation, which part's the text. So from these few words that in and of themselves don't give the whole picture, this is really what the Mishnah says. But here with Steinsaltz's help, we could see what it's talking about. We've been addressing oaths and different ways to categorize them. And while the Mishnah started by saying, there are two categories of oaths that are really four, turns out there are lots of different ways we can slice the categories, and some new categories are introduced in the Mishnah that we saw on Shavuot 25a. So here's a fuller version of that brief text from before. If one unwittingly takes a false oath about the past or breaks an oath one made about the future, right? Really, what this Masachet about is about when you make an oath and then you don't fulfill it, that you're on the hook for some sacrifices and other things. So, both if it is an oath that addresses matters that concern oneself, and if it's an oath that addresses matters that concern others, one is liable to bring a sliding scale offering for an oath of an utterance, on an utterance. So those extra words fill some of the details in to tell us that if we're going to make an oath about something that concerns others or something that just concerns ourselves, both of those categories of oaths fall into the category of oaths that which, if we break them, those are utterances that we made and then not held to, and that we have to bring a sliding scale offering, meaning that's an offering that has a different. There's a sliding scale in terms of what kind of animal you have to offer, or what you have to offer, so that it's a sort of a sliding scale based on your economic ability to pay. So it gives access to allow everyone who needs to make such a sacrifice to do so. And likewise, says the Mishnah, an oath on an utterance may address both tangible matters and intangible matters. So same thing is true whether the oath is about you or also involves another, or if it's about something tangible or something intangible. And each of these things, both the individual an oath applying to yourself or an oath applying to others, or tangible or intangible, apply to oaths about the past, something you take an oath about what you've already done, or about the future, an oath about something that you will do. So it's lots of different categories, right? Past, future, self, other, tangible, intangible. Any of those oaths about any of these things are oaths that if they become false, you're on the hook for breaking an oath. That's what this Mishnah introduces. And to concretize it a little bit for us, the Mishnah asks, how so? Give me some examples of this. And it gives us some examples of what these different categories might look like. And I feel like had the Mishnah just given these examples, it would be a little less wordy or a little less complex in the read we just had and easier to picture. So here's an example of some of them. And I like how the Mishnah sort of combines two different categories, so it doesn't have to, it saves some space a little bit. The first set of examples it gives talk about past and future. It talks about something tangible and an oath that applies to others. So it's some of the categories. So if you say, on my oath, I will give so-and-so something, right? The something's implied. Or on my oath, I will not give it to them. Or on my oath, I gave another person, right, a particular item. Or on my oath, I did not give it to them. So here there's an oath that involves somebody else because you're giving something to them. It involves something tangible, an actual thing that you gave to them, whatever that thing might be. And it's both past and future. So that's an example of some of the types of oaths. And here they go to intangible. I like the sort of choice about intangible itself. I wonder as I think about this, is this real? Well, I'll talk about it after I read it. On my oath, I will sleep, or on my oath, I will not sleep, or on my oath, I slept, or on my oath, I did not sleep. So here we also have past and future. This is something that just involves me. I slept, doesn't connect to another person at all. And different from giving, right? I gave an apple to somebody. Here it just says I slept. There's no tangible object involved in this oath. There's the action of sleeping. And I guess for the rabbis, thinking about sleep is an intangible thing. It might be not concrete. I'm not sure that we would call sleep intangible in our day. But as opposed to having an actual object, right? Sleep is this action. And these are all oaths that should you not fulfill them, you're on the hook. Okay. The Gemara picks up on one, but it's going to talk about all this, but the piece of Gemara I'm going to bring picks up on one of these particular examples and talks about the notion of giving, an oath about giving. And it has some questions about what that might mean. So the Gemara says the Mishnah teaches how so, meaning it's referring to the place where the Mishnah gives examples of these different oaths, right? And examples are, one of the examples is, I guess, on my oath, I will give so-and-so some item, or on my oath, I will not give it to them. And then the Gemara asks, what is the case of an oath in which one says, I will give? Like, what are we talking about here when you say, I will give? Because actually the Mishnah, right, just going back to that original point about the brevity of the Mishnah just says, I will give. It doesn't even include, like, I will give something, right? The object of what you're giving is sort of implied. And the Gemara is going to read this in the narrow sense, I will give. I'm going to give somebody something, and that what they are going to explore is, what if the thing that we're giving is money? If we say that one takes an oath that they will give charity to the poor, to a poor person, this is not an oath that takes effect, since one is under oath from Mount Sinai. I highlighted that in yellow because that's the principle we're going to dig into today. Right, since one is under oath to give from Mount Sinai to give charity, as it is stated with regard to a poor person, you shall give him, Deuteronomy 15:10. That's a verse that says you should provide for your neighbor in need. So what's the problem here? The text says, the Gemara says, right, that what the Mishnah could be talking about when it says I will give is about giving charity, giving money, and the object of the person to whom you're giving money could be a poor person. But if that is true, the Gemara says an oath in which you take that says, I will give money to a poor person, that kind of oath doesn't take effect at all. Why? Because you're already under obligation to give money to a poor person from Mount Sinai. So what does that mean? It means that right, the Torah in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 10, obligates us to provide for the needy. All right, we're supposed to provide money and sustenance to someone who doesn't have the resources to make ends meet on their own. And since the Torah obligates us to do this, we're already under a state, an oath-like state based on our obligations to fulfill what's in the Torah. And making an oath to do something that the Torah already commands us to do, that sort of oath does not take effect, since we're already obligated. Right? So what does the Gemara do with this? Here, they're trying to figure out what the I will give means and not talk about this notion of being obligated from Sinai. And they say, well, if someone makes an oath that says, I will give, they must be talking about making a gift of money to someone who's rich. The rabbis, it might mean someone who's rich, like on the other end of the spectrum as someone who's poor. But when the rabbis, if they're contrasting poor and rich might be just someone who's well off enough to not need extra sustenance from gifts from an individual or the community. So it might be a full range. Anyone rich here might mean anyone who's not poor. But since we don't have an obligation to give money to someone who's not poor, an oath that says, I will give, if you're talking about a rich person, that oath does take effect. And then should you make such an oath, you're obligated by that oath. And if you don't end up giving money to a person who's not poor, you've broken your oath. And why does this oath take effect? Because you're not making an oath about something that's already a commandment for you to do. So here's how that comes up on Shavuot 25. We're going to see it a couple times. It comes up in the context of another Mishnah as well about here the Talmud specifically talking about oaths that we might make about performing or not performing obligations from the Torah. So it sort of found its way in from the I will give state. Here it's a little more direct. The Mishnah on 27a teaches if one takes an oath to refrain from performing a mitzvah and the person does not refrain, meaning I say, I am not going to build I take an oath. I'm not going to use oath language right now, but use the oath language to say, I'm taking an oath that I'm not going to build a sukkah this year. And then in the end, you build your sukkah this year, right? The booth that we build for the holiday of Sukkot. Technically, you've made an oath. You're not going to build a sukkah, and then you built it. So you've broken your oath, and you should be on the hook for sacrifice. But the Mishnah tells us we're exempt from bringing an from having to bring an offering for such an oath, because right, an oath for that says you're not going to perform a mitzvah, and then you actually perform the mitzvah. Then, case number two, if one takes an oath to perform a mitzvah and then you don't perform the mitzvah, one is exempt. So here's a second oath that you're not really held to. You take an oath that says, I will build a sukkah, and then you don't build a sukkah. You're exempt from the oath because, right, in both these cases, the assumption is because you're obligated to do the mitzvah, this oath about your obligation doesn't take effect, which is what we saw earlier, right? If I say, I'm not going to build a sukkah, and then you end up building it, you've done what you're supposed to do based on the rules of the Torah, build a sukkah for the holiday of Sukkot. Your oath that says you're going to refrain from doing so doesn't take effect, right? You're exempt from breaking that oath because you can't really take an oath to not do something that the Torah obligates you to do. And also, the next case is you can't take an oath to say you're going to do something that the Torah says you're going to do because you're already obligated to do it, right? This second category is parallel to the issue of giving, right, money to a poor person, which you're obligated to do. So you can't take an oath about it. It would be true about building a sukkah or any other of the mitzvot in the Torah. Things that you're supposed to do, you can't take an oath to do them since you already have to do them. The last thing the Mishnah tells us says, well, this is true, you're exempt, but it would have been fitting to claim that you are liable to bring such an offering in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera disagrees that you're exempt. And the rabbis say we actually think there's something to it, what he's saying, even though it turns out that's not what the practice is. And here's where he introduces this concept about being under an oath from Mount Sinai. He uses a piece of standard rabbinic logic that's sometimes a little wordy and ends up with a little headache in trying to follow the parts. I'll try to do my best to read and explain what he says here. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera says, right, what? He's sort of objecting to this notion that you're exempt. And here's why. If regard to an oath concerning an optional matter, right? So if in a case where I'm taking an oath about something that's optional, I'm not obligated to do, right? Like I take an oath saying I'm going to wear my blue shirt today, which I have no obligation to do, right, from the Torah or anywhere else within Jewish law, right, for which one is not under oath from Mount Sinai, one is liable for breaking it. So when you take an oath about something optional, if you break the oath, you're on the hook for breaking the oath because you didn't stand true to your words, right? Then says Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, if you take an oath about something that's a mitzvah, which is something for which you are under obligation to do, meaning here is it not logical that one would be liable for breaking it? He sort of, what he says here and what the force of this is, if you take an oath about something optional, we hold you to your words. But optional things don't have the significance of like Mount Sinai behind them. So if you're taking an oath about a mitzvah, which has this gravitas, because right, our obligation to it is much higher than, right, actually there is an obligation. It's not an optional thing. It makes logical sense that an oath about something more serious, we would hold you to a higher consequence. And you should be held liable for breaking that oath because you're breaking an oath about something that you have to do. So, right, if we're going to hold you accountable for oaths about optional things, we should hold you accountable for oaths about obligatory things. Here he introduces this concept again of, right, about being under oath from Mount Sinai. The rabbis take a different view. If you're already under oath from Mount Sinai, you can't be held accountable. For your oath about such a thing, because the commitment from Mount Sinai trumps all of that. So here are a couple of the places where we see this concept that the rabbis feel like for obligations that come from the Torah, we already have a level of commitment to them that we can't make oaths about them. And reading these statements that appeared a number of times in the Talmud this week, it made me think about do we or do I act that way? And what is it that the rabbis are saying here? As I thought about it more and more, the rabbis are conceptualizing the obligations that come from the Torah as if they were oaths, meaning the obligations that the Torah places upon us. The rabbis consider them to be at oath level commitment, so that you can't add an oath to it. And we have to take seriously our obligation to do them as if we made oaths about it. Now, it's an exploration for another day or another time, about, about to explore why would the rabbis, there is a good question, why would the rabbis think that we are obligated by an oath to follow the Torah? There are a number of biblical sources and rabbinic sources you could explore about that. Turns out it's not totally straightforward or clear. If you're interested, you could Google the Daf Yomi from Hadron, the Daf Yomi video from Hadron from this year, from page 27, I want to say. There's an exploration of that there, right? Where do the rabbis get this notion from the Bible? But I'll give a simple one, right? There's a classic text that's quoted a lot from the book of Exodus at Mount Sinai, where the people say, "We will listen and we will do." Seven Ishma. And sometimes the rabbis read that to say, right, we took upon ourselves the commitment to follow whatever God told us. And that's and the language that we use could be considered to be an oath. We could explore in depth how the rabbis derived at this assumption, but I just want to take that at face value, that the rabbis say we're under oath-like obligation to follow what's in the Torah. And we've been reading of late, both, I guess, in Masachet Nedarim, that was about vows and not oaths, but also now in Masachet Shvuot about oaths, right? The seriousness that the rabbis have us take our word when we invoke certain formulas to say, here's what I'm going to do, or here's what I'm going to refrain from doing. And they apply that through this concept that we're already under oath from Mount Sinai to all of Jewish practice. And if we take that same level of seriousness, what the rabbis are saying to us, I think, in these pages in this week, and a little bit I'll go into next week, we have a serious obligation to fulfill all these mitzvot in the Torah. Now, it's not surprising that the rabbis would argue that. We know they take mitzvot seriously, but they raise it to this level of oath. And I wonder if that's an operative concept for us today. Meaning, I would go back to my sukkah example. Like, I remember my dad, when I was young, my dad one year decided, next year we're going to build a sukkah. He didn't use oath-like language, but we hadn't had a sukkah. And we got to the holiday of Sukkot, and he said, this is something we could do. He liked construction. He liked building things. He's an engineer, so he likes the design and all those pieces. He committed himself to figure out, how can I build a sukkah, build it in the backyard. He made a design. He checked it out with our rabbi to make sure his design was good. And then he followed through and he did it. And I would say in our day, we think that's a great step, as a rabbi, as a teacher. If someone would come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about building a sukkah, I want to rejoice in this notion that someone's taking on something new that they hadn't taken on. Right? And my mindset about people when people come to me and say, hey, rabbi, here's, I'm thinking about starting to wear tefillin. I want to make my kitchen kosher. I want to think more about how to bring Shabbat into my life. Whatever those things are, the statement of commitment that they're making, one, I take seriously. Two, I embrace and I celebrate, and I use it as a moment to help them on their path forward to a fuller Jewish life. And it strikes me that's a little bit at odds with how the rabbis might respond to say, what do you mean you're making a statement that you want to do kashrut more? you're already obligated to do kashrut more from the Torah. Um, and there's definitely a different tone or a different nuance to that sort of response. It's definitely, I would imagine, a little less welcoming to the person who comes to approach you to say, hey, I want more of this Judaism in my life. And here's a mitzvah that I find attractive. Help me understand it and help me integrate it into my life. Right. It strikes me that it's not good pastoral care. It's not good educationally for me to say, well, you making a commitment to add this doesn't mean anything since you're already really supposed to be, obligated to do it, and really you've been neglecting it here in your life until now. And I was just struck as I read these passages this week that, well, I understand from the rabbinic mindset this notion of invoking oath level commitment to the obligations of the Torah makes sense in the rabbinic concept, in the rabbinic context, and makes sense for them to talk about it in the Talmud. And it did give me pause to think about my own Jewish commitments and what level of that I'm walking around. The rabbis want me to feel like I'm walking around with an oath level commitment to the fullest of Jewish practices, and I have to take seriously that commitment. And if I miss, I'm on the hook for a sacrifice, or I'm on the hook for breaking my commitment. And there's a positive weight. There's a weight I feel of that on my shoulders, and a positive piece to that sort of approach that I felt personally of like, oh yeah, this stuff is serious and weighty, and I ought to take it really seriously because I have an obligation to it. Yet, in my work as a rabbi, as an educator, um, um, as I said, just before, it's not the framework that I go to when someone shows up and says, uh, I'd like to, take seriously, I'd like to increase my commitment to a particular observance. For me, that's a moment to celebrate, to rejoice, to help them forward, both in the ways that it's easy for them to implement the new practice and in their struggles with doing so. And even if they try it for a while and say, yep, not for me, I feel like it's my obligation to embrace them where they're at, more so than to hold the oath over their head. So some thoughts about what's in the Gemara and how it might apply to us today. I'm going to pause now. Oh, I see there's been a lively 53 comment
Yeah,
conversation
I'm
going on in the chat.
actually having trouble keeping up with the chat today because there's a lot in here. One question folks have is, first off, thank you. I think highlighting this notion, especially as we're about to go into Shavuot, that the commitments of the Torah, the commandments the Torah enjoins on us are oath level commandments. Of course, the question here is the rabbis obviously lived in a period where you already couldn't bring a sacrifice for failing to uphold an oath or making a false oath. And how should we think about that today?
Oh,
We definitely,
yeah.
you know.
Well, um, the rabbis deal with this some in thinking about Yom Kippur. Uh, how we repent. How do we today, without sacrifice, make amends for what we do wrong? Right. And the process of repentance is one of those things, right? The rabbis found substitute systems, and we explored that some when we looked at Masachet Yom Kippur years ago. Feels like a lifetime ago. Remember Yom Kippur? That was Masachet Yoma. That was a long time ago. Um, some of like there's the mechanical piece. We can't break sacrifices. What do? We could do tshuva. We could do repentance. There are things we could do. Some of what I think when I read this is some of this is about gut response. Like there's the technical fix. How do we do it without the temple? But I think there's the gravity of it that the rabbis want us to feel. It's not exactly, sometimes we call it Jewish guilt, but I think it's about like the feeling of failure to be accountable. When you miss the mark, there's this heaviness we feel like I was supposed to do this and I didn't. I've I feel it when I'm 10 minutes late to picking up my kid from school. I was supposed to be here to pick up my kid. I know I got, my meeting ran over and I was late. I feel awful. And now I'm here to pick them up. And like I carry this, I missed the mark. And sometimes, for me, anyways, I don't know if this is helpful for all of you. The notion is when you make a commitment that's oath level, or when you have a commitment to a mitzvah and you don't fulfill it, in our day, it's not about the sacrifices, that technical fix. It's the internal piece of how do I respond to this, and how do I, in the next time, do it differently. And that's sort of the repentance approach, which is not only right in the Mishnah and the Talmud, right? The go and read most of the Haftarot, right? Read the words of the prophets who, not in every chapter, but in most chapters, say you're just bringing the sacrifices and you think that's enough to repair what you've done wrong. The sacrifices aren't the point of it. The point of it is to be better people. If you're doing the sacrifices and not being better people, it doesn't help. So like for me in this day, the feeling of the serious, if I've done something for which the rabbis say you're on the hook for a sacrifice, even though we're not in a time of the sacrificial system. For me, that means, oh, this is serious. And I have to take it seriously. And that brings me to the like repentance space instead of the temple space.
Lot to chew on, especially when we consider that the oath that we have been was made for us in terms of the mitzvot, right?
Yes.
Makes it different from
Yes.
all these other kinds of oaths.
Right. That's why this is just a sprinkling into this concept, like this concept of we're already under oath from Sinai. We know other places. I would just say like there's this, there are other stories of rabbis embracing people saying, hey, I want to do this more, right? The rabbis recognize that not all the people in their day fulfilled Jewish life the way they envisioned it. And they talk about the people in the marketplace who don't take the proper tithes, and maybe we have to re-tithe the food to make sure we can eat it. They don't walk around the marketplace saying, you owe a sacrifice, you owe a sacrifice, you owe a sacrifice. They just know if I buy from your shop, I have to tax myself. Because they weren't on this mission to like make everybody feel bad all the time. But in these passages with this concept, like introducing this notion, think about our commitment to Judaism and where it comes from and what level it binds us. It's something serious to consider. And you're right, Rachel, going into Shavuot, it's not a bad thing to think about as we're about to spend time thinking about our relationship to Torah and our reception of it and what that means for us to be the receivers of Torah in our day, in the past, and in the future.
Thank you. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of the really wonderful questions and comments today. Please bring them again next week. We will continue to chip away at our understand. That's really not a great metaphor. Continue to, Rabbi Akiva envisioned himself a rock and learning was like water that slowly wore away the stone. And yet it was a positive metaphor. So I'm going to go ahead and adopt that one here. We will continue to just slowly increase our understanding of these texts. In that vein, I also wanted to say that we have scheduled the next Daf Yomi Off the Daf book club. It will be at the end of next month, at the very end of June, June 30th. We are going to read Maggie Anton's Rav Chista's daughter. We've decided to take a swerve into fiction and see how one person imagines the world of the rabbis in an historical fiction setting. So that
Yes.
there should be information in your emails about that. And we look forward to hopefully meeting with you then to talk about that then. And also this month, Rabbi Goldberg, you are going to give a class on the Hadron for us in a couple
Yes.
of weeks.
Yes. We've had a series of
That
shorter
blessing that we
Masato.
say at the end of a tractate, because we're running through tractates so fast. We thought we would take a minute to talk about this blessing that we say every time we end a tractate. So lots of good things coming up in June, aside from the regular daily daf. It's a pleasure to learn with you all and be with you all. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for facilitating this morning and
Sure.
teaching. And I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach. I hope everyone has a really meaningful Shavuot, and I'll see you on the other side.
Take care, everybody. Chag
Bye.
Sameach. Bye.